Okay, good morning, everybody. This is our pre-lunch appetizer. The Enough is Enough, Challenging the Cost of Living Crisis session. My name's Hilary Salt. I'm only here to chair, so I'm not going to make a big introductory speech because I know you actually want to hear from our fantastic speakers today and from yourselves, our enthusiastic audience, who are the inflationary spiral of the battle of ideas. So, for all our speakers, they have very illustrious and long CVs, all of which are on the website. So I'm going to introduce our speakers in the order in which they speak, and they are sitting in the order in which they'll speak, just to make it all very simple for us all to follow. So Niall Crowley is a campaigner against low traffic neighbourhoods, an independent councillor candidate, a writer, a designer, a real kind of community activist, and I know you'll be really interested to hear what he has to say. Jasmine Birtles, a financial columnist, media star, I think, these days, it's worth saying. A founder of moneymagpie.com, author of Beat the Banks. Then Richard Tice, who thankfully just about arrived on time, saved my blood pressure.
Been told off already.
I'm sure you'll all be really familiar with Richard, businessman turned politician, former MEP, leader of Reform UK. And I cannot believe the kind of political distance, I think, between these two guys here, which I think is going to make for a really good, sparky discussion. Charlie Winstanley, who's the Northwest co-ordinator of Enough is Enough, a serial campaigner, I would say, as well as the political advisor to the Mayor of Salford, although he's not speaking in that capacity today. And then finally, Alan Miller, co-founder of the old Truman Brewery, Nighttime Industries Association as well. Another serial campaigner, really, the Recovery, Open for All, the Together campaigns. Again, I'm sure many people will be familiar with him. So that's our esteemed panel, and we're going to kick off now. So, Niall, do you want to start off for us?
Thank you. Morning, everyone. I just wanted to kick off with a few opening remarks, really, and I scribbled a few things down last week, and I think they're actually more true and more pertinent today, or some of them anyway, than they were this time last week. May you believe in interesting times, goes the old Chinese curse, and we certainly are living in interesting times. They're so interested it might be tempting to go hide under the table, or just switch off and just hide from it, or even grow cynical and disengage. But we don't want to do that. It feels like we're moving into a whole new era where the old certainties are just crumbling before us. But what is certain is that most of our leaders and institutions and organisations are really not up to the job of tackling today's problems. And I think that's just getting clearer by the day. And it's also clear that right across the Western world over the last couple of years, people have had enough and really do want change, and I think that was something we touched upon in the previous session here. You could say that over the last couple of years, the spectre of populism is haunting Europe, but what's haunting the populace at the moment, amongst other things, is the cost of living crisis. So I want to kind of take a look at things from a grassroots perspective, if you like. I know that's a bit of a cliche, but during the early period of lockdown, I got, thank you very much, quite heavily involved in campaigns in North and East London against the imposition of draconian imposition of road closures, otherwise known as low traffic neighbourhoods. And I just thought if I could share a couple of reflections and dilemmas from that, it might bring something to bear on the conversation. First off, they were much more than simply closing a few roads and making it all hunky-dory for cyclists, but they were really an attack on basic freedoms of ordinary people, our choices, and even the living standards of working people and people who need to get around on the roads. And they were implemented in the most contemptuous and anti-democratic and often idiotic ways. And the fact that it blew up in a kind of London-wide mini rebellion and stretched further afield is kind of testament, I think, to the fact that there is a wider significance to them. But the campaigns themselves, I think what was really positive about them is that if people are often branded as kind of cynical and apathetic, but I think if you people recognise a very clear and direct attack on them, then they will respond and they will fight back. So in Hackney and Islington and elsewhere, people literally woke up one morning to find their roads blocked off. The basic things that they normally do: drive to the shops, drop their kids up, pick their mother up on the way to work, or, go to work, all of those kind of things they couldn't do. There was no explanation. It made no sense to them. So the response was fairly swift, and overnight people were networking, organising online groups that quickly multiplied into many thousands, and it wasn't long before people were out en masse organising. And again, another interesting point I thought was that the people who were at the forefront of organising things weren't people who were seasoned political campaigners, masses of political experience. And I thought that was a really good and inspiring thing, because they just didn't carry the old political baggage of the way things are doing. And we need more of that. And I think it helped people be much more brave and adventurous in some of the things that they were doing. It was much less dogmatic, left and right didn't really matter. And I think it's no exaggeration to say that there's a wealth of talent and experience amongst ordinary people, the potential from sometimes the most unexpected places. The people who formed the groups that I was helping to organise were working class mothers who relied on their cars to get around, people who had no political experience. And I don't mean the ability to just organise a protest. I'm talking about the potential to begin to solve some of our problems. There is an enormous potential in the public. And I think that's what is so often dismissed, and something that we really need to bring to bear on political debate and political discussion. As you can see, it's becoming more and more obvious that the political blob, or the elite, or whatever we want to call them, really are out of kilter. They're more and more remote from the needs and experiences of ordinary people. So I think there's something quite positive to be. There are kind of positive things, even though we're enjoying really difficult times. Jeremy Hunt said yesterday, "This is no time for populism." The new CEO of the UK, but I think actually it's more time for populism. I've got quite a few things I'd like to say later in the discussion, but just whizzing by those pages, I would just conclude that I think that these are really worrying times, but I think there are real opportunities, and it seems to me that politics is really beginning to break apart, and it will, I hope, present opportunities, and there's lots of potential there. So those are my kind of opening remarks.
Thanks, Sam. Jasmine.
I said this would happen from the start of the lockdown. I was one of the few speaking up against lockdowns from the start, against the huge tidal wave of opinion that was pro-lockdown. I said that when you suppress production of everything, not just in this country, but across the West, and at the same time print squillions of pounds, you get inflation. You get a cost of living crisis. And oh look, we've got one. But it didn't just start there. If we go back to, for example, the great financial crisis, the GFC, as those in the know call it, we started printing money. I remember at the time thinking, yes, it's quite right to support the banks. We need to keep stability. I've now changed my mind. I think we should have let at least some of them fail. Yes. What we did was we printed billions and billions of pounds, and we stuffed it into bankers' pockets. And we didn't stop printing money. We gave 58 billion pounds to one bank, RBS. Did that help? No. We are some way, 15 years along from that. It's still a zombie bank. They're all zombie banks. We are still supporting a zombie banking system, and it's looked after by our zombie Bank of England, frankly. The Bank of England should be the lender of last resort. Increasingly, it has become the lender of first resort, as our normal banks, who used to just borrow from each other when they needed it through the interbank rate, now go straight to mummy and daddy, Bank of England, saying, can you lend us a fiver? 5 million, I mean. And the Bank of England does it. Isn't that nice? And that is the system that we are running at the moment. Our banking system is leaching money from the system, from us, from all of the organisations, from the education, the health, etc., that we should be spending money on. It is leaching money. So what we need, I consider, right now, as Niall says, things do look like they're breaking up. What we need is a new system. I suggest that we get rid of everybody at the Bank of England right now. A clean sweep, and we bring in people who are, and this is a crazy thought, honest, and want to set up an honest system based on something solid. I would suggest, for example, though not necessarily limited to, gold. What seems to be coming along at the moment, if we don't stop it, and it looks like our populace, because we are so financially illiterate in this country, our populace is not aware of the danger, so is not shouting and screaming to stop it. What we will get if we don't do this is central bank digital currencies, CBDCs, which in my view are the devil. Just, put that out there. They represent a complete loss of freedom, not just a complete loss of financial freedom, but a complete loss of freedom, full stop. Because when you control the money, and that is what a CBDC is, it's a complete control of our earnings and very much our spendings, you control the people. So I feel that, firstly, yes, we do need a clean sweep of the central bank system in this country, the Bank of England. We need to allow banks to fail, maybe make some of them nationalised just to keep things going. We certainly need to stop central bank digital currencies. And we also, and I don't know, I'm sure everybody here has said this for decades, I certainly have, we need financial literacy in this country. We need a financially literate community to actually be aware of what's happening. Just to give you a few figures, right at this moment, according to the FCA, the Financial Conduct Authority, 11 million people in this country have no savings whatsoever and have no intention of saving. Another 11 million have less than £100 in savings. 27 million people in this country are in serious personal debt. That's about 40% of the country. So this is the situation that we have at the moment. We have a financially illiterate voting cohort, and we have a banking system that is just laughing at us, frankly. So I think it needs a root and branch change. We need honesty. We need a new lot of people at the Bank of England, and we need a whole new banking system. Thank you.
Okay, Richard.
Thank you, Hilary. So I just thought I'd set the context first, which is that not only have we got a political crisis, but we've actually got the gravest economic crisis since the Second World War. It's pretty terrifying. We've got a growth crisis, the lowest decade of growth for 70 years. We've got a tax crisis, the highest taxes for some 70 years. An inflation crisis, the highest inflation for 30 years. And a productivity crisis, the lowest productivity for 20 years. We've got 1 in 8 of the working age population is on out of work benefits. And yet we're told there's a labour shortage. And that is extraordinary. Something is wrong. Rishi's solution, and for all we know, we could be sitting here in a week's time and Rishi might be Prime Minister. I think that's eminently possible. Rishi's solution was to raise personal taxes, raise corporate taxes, raise government spending, and that creates a subsidy culture. And the result of that is actually what we've seen when he was Chancellor. Lower growth, inflation remains high, and tragically, there's a disincentive to work. Now, I put forward not one but two emergency recovery plans this summer, and I still believe they absolutely hold valid. The key to the cost of everything is the cost of energy. It drives the cost of literally everything we do. And I just want you to think, for 25 years, this country, we actually were self-reliant on energy, and we even exported it. Think about the flow of money with energy. If you buy energy from overseas, whether it's gas or electricity, what happens? You send your money overseas, they send you the energy, you burn the energy, okay, you've been warm for a week, where's the money? It's overseas. The money's gone, and it ain't coming back. If you use your own energy, the energy treasure under our feet, and this great island of ours is blessed with a century's worth of cheap, reliable energy. If you use your own energy, you spend your money, where's the money? It stays here in the United Kingdom. And that is a fundamental economic point. You either buy energy from overseas and you send your money and it's gone, and you're poorer, or you use our own energy. So we should be using cheap British energy. We should be developing the new technologies, that's great. But for heaven's sake, folks, let's use our own. Now, of course, with the crisis we've got, it was right to have an energy price freeze. I proposed, the point is though, why should the taxpayer pay in order to make primarily foreign-owned energy producers even richer than they already are? That is the solution of this Tory government. They've no idea how many billions it is. It could be 50, it could be 100, it could be 200. I said in mid-August when I launched this plan, we're in a global energy war. People thought I was being a little bit dramatic. 5 weeks later, terrorists, whoever, we don't know, are blowing up gas pipelines. I think I was proven right. If you think you can rely on energy connectors from overseas, you're vulnerable. You have to use your own cheap energy. We've got cheap energy. We should use it. So that's the flaw in the government's plan. And therefore you've got this unfunded taxpayer debt. And the markets thought, hang on, where's that debt going to come from? See what's happened here? So the markets thought it could be 50, it could be 100, it could be 150, it could be 200. We've no idea how long this energy war lasts. 3 years, 5 years, 7 years. We've got a supply crisis. Then Kwasi comes along and he just punts it all on red and hopes it'll be all right. And we know the consequences. But actually, the quantity of money that he was talking about, the market had already priced in. I know it sounds a bit glib, but you know, it was 40 billion, give or take, 45. The unfunded, unlimited energy freeze is hundreds of billions. That's what scared the markets. That's why my energy plan would have prevented all of that. But the cost of energy drives the cost of living crisis. So the government is now sort of talking about some form of revenue cap. It's a step in the right direction. But be under no illusion, this energy crisis, it's not 6 months. If it is, great. But I think Keir Starmer is being deeply naive thinking this is a 6-month crisis. What happens if it's 5 years? Then the cost is 200, 300, 400, 500 billion. When do you stop making the rich overseas energy producers even richer? Who owns the majority of our offshore wind farms? Anyone know?
France.
Well, firstly, most of it is overseas owned. The biggest single investor is the Danish government on behalf of taxpayers. On the economic side, I've just been given the yellow card, 2 of those, and I'm doomed. On the economic side, you've got to cut zero, you should have zero income tax below 20 grand of earnings. That saves 1,500 quid a year for the, you've got to improve lives for the least well off, the lowest paid. You scrap VAT on energy bills, a Brexit benefit this government's failed to use. You scrap the environmental levies. You reduce fuel duty, which benefits the least well off the most by 20p a litre, that creates more economic activity. You reduce VAT from 20% to 18%, and you use our own energy, our own gas, our own oil. But here's the rub. We've all looked at our household budget to say, we need to save 5 quid in 100, right? Businesses are doing the same. If the government said that to the massive amount of wasteful government spending and said, I'm going to save 5 quid in 100, you save 50 billion quid. That pays for all my measures. That is how you deal with the cost of living crisis. I've had the red card. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Richard. Charlie.
Hi, thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to start by sort of going back to the question, challenging the cost of living crisis, and just sort of ask a very open question here. And what do we mean by cost of living crisis? You know, is it that people are struggling to afford their food? Is it that they're struggling to afford the heating? Is it that they can't afford a house, or that they can't afford luxuries? Because one point I'd like to make is that actually, for most of recent human history, all of these situations have been considered the norm. And I think when we're talking about a cost of living crisis, actually what we're talking about is a crisis of expectation with the recent past, with a post-war period of prosperity, where growth and steadily increasing wages were assumed, that economic progress from one decade to the next was taken as a given, and that we will have a situation of near full employment and lifelong job security, universal education, and very high rates of social mobility. So I think actually what we're experiencing here is in terms of it being a cost of living crisis, is a cost of living crisis relative to post-war Western prosperity. And I just wanted to make that point because I think that there's some really interesting things about what happened in the 70s cost of living crisis as opposed to what's happening today, and what's happened in previous economic times of turmoil, so the 1930s or the 1880s, when things were very different. You know, we didn't call the 1930s a cost of living crisis when people were pawning all the furniture and sitting on orange boxes in the front room, you know. We didn't call the 1880s a cost of living crisis when mill workers in Lancashire were starving to death in the mill towns around Manchester. You know, these were just recessions, and that was just capitalism. And that was the situation that we moved from. Whereas what happened in the 70s, I think, is very interesting, because in the 70s, if you look at the stats, you know, in terms of the sort of the core data, a lot of things were very similar to today. So I think, you know, inflation peaked at around 25% in 1975 in the 70s, 15.6% in April of that year as well. You know, we're anticipating potential 18% inflation in the new year here. So we're in similar territory in some regards. There's something else that happened in the 70s, which I think is really useful to note, which is that over the course of the 70s, the real disposable income per head of the population actually increased. I was looking at, I think, some Telegraph figures on this, and it increased by roughly 30%, which is actually more than the 20% real disposable incomes increased with between 1950 and 1960. So in the 1970s, which is often written off as a lost economic generation, a lost economic decade, people ended up better off at the end of that decade than they were at the start. And, you know, this crisis is very different, and it's different for a lot of reasons. I think it's different because we are entering this crisis from the position of total wage growth stagnation for 40 years. So from the beginning of the 1980s, the growth in real wages started to fall. And that actually turned from a growth in real wages falling to actual loss of real wages from around the first quarter of 2010. And right now, real wages are lower now than they were 10 years ago in this country. And so we're coming into this crisis from 40 years, effectively, of decline. And we're coming into this crisis from a position of us having already flogged off the family silver. So I very much agree with a lot of what Richard's just said, particularly around energy security. And what I would say is that, you know, we have got rid of our assets. We've vandalised our public assets in this country. We've flogged them off, sold them off. And in my opinion, there's an economic orthodoxy, an economic insanity in this country which has prevailed since Margaret Thatcher's government in the 1980s, which is about selling absolutely every asset off and allowing the market to take over. And I think what we've ended up here is the system which Richard's just outlined to a great degree, where insofar as the state is considered to have any role at all, it's considered to be simply a siphon through which the central bank can funnel money into contractors that now directly provide a lot of the services which once were provided through the public sector. So this is education, this is healthcare, this is energy, this is the trains. That is the function of the British state now, and that's the function of the services which were once provided through the British state, is simply as a cipher for a small number of vested interests to become incredibly wealthy, many of them offshore, taking that wealth out. We no longer talk about a balance of payments in this country. It used to be a hot topic amongst economists. People used to be very concerned about the balance of incomings as opposed to outgoings. Nobody's been talking about that for decades. Why? You know, it's because it doesn't suit the interests of the economy that we've created today to actually recognise that the model that we've taken away from an industrialised, functioning economy with a large manufacturing sector employing large numbers of people on skilled, well-paid jobs We've moved from that to a heavily financialised economy, which is based around tertiary service sector economies. Basically, we've replaced skilled manufacturing engineering jobs with barista jobs serving fancy coffees and craft lagers to financiers in the City of London. And no surprise that that's left large areas of this country completely bereft of any kind of economic purpose anymore. And which are these areas of the country? Surprise, surprise. It's the red wall, isn't it? It's your Brexit voting, northern, white working class towns that are the places which have been most desperately impacted by the shift in economic model. So I just wanted to sort of come through, because I've written too much and I've been given my red card. I wanted to come through and start to, well, bloody hell. And wind up by saying that what I really think here is that we've got an economic model which isn't designed to actually benefit the large majority of the people in the society. We've got an economic model which has shifted away from productive work, creating real things and real things of value, to one which is based on, the kind of ethereal wealth which has just been discussed by both Jasmine and Richard in this conversation today. It doesn't work. It doesn't work. And one final thing as well is, one of the things that I think helped us in the 1970s in terms of those real wage increases through that decade was strong trade unions who, during a global economic recession, put in inflation-busting pay rises year on year and won them. Now, I don't think that you would have had a situation, the only situation to my knowledge in history, where during a recession average household incomes increased. I don't think you would have had that situation if you didn't have a strong trade union base. So what I'm talking about and what the Enough is Enough campaign is talking about, I'm not going to try and defend the Labour Party today, believe me. I'm not going to go there. But what the Enough is Enough campaign is talking about is about rebuilding an economy which working class people are at the centre of, both politically and economically.
Great point to finish that. Alan,
So my mum is usually a barometer of things, said to me last night, why are people not out in the streets protesting about what's just happened? And it's a very good question. And I think, though, that this has been a great set of contributions. And I'd like to sort of look at sort of the broader cultural and political situation I think we find ourselves in, because I know it's partly about campaigning and doing that, but I think it's important to just sort of take a step back a bit. And I think we're being held back by these political and cultural set of attitudes, none of them which is worse than humanity. That's me, you, friends, neighbours, colleagues, are locust-like devourers, that we've gone too far, that we're mad, bad and dangerous, and that whatever we do will make things worse and not better, that we should be limited, restricted, suffocated. Now, this is the gravest issue I believe we face, and the one that we must address all together in order to properly and adequately tackle both the immediacy of the cost of living crisis, which is partly a cost of lockdown crisis, but much more as well as the medium and long-term ability to ensure plentiful, cheap energy, high standards of living, and a world where our imagination, ingenuity and innovation can curate things using our agency, rather than being in a perpetual state of crisis. Now, one thing we definitely need to resuscitate is the can-do ambition of the Industrial Revolution, the robust dynamic optimism of the age of engineering, of innovation and transformation, of manufacturing and making things. When we tunnelled to the future in the 19th century, creating the London Underground, where we built bridges and experimented with engines and flight, where the aspiration to ensure everyone would benefit through the development of capacity and ingenuity, that was the order of the day. I start with this because while I'm dedicated and passionate about campaigning, I think it's vital we evaluate, assess and then remedy the things that are holding us back as society. The source of our ailments, if we're going to locate them, became very practical in the 1970s. Having experienced a 2-decade post-war boom, as Charlie says, Ford workers enjoying high wages on the shop floor in America, enabling ordinary people to have a lifestyle where swimming pools were part of the dream, as well as cars and produce. But then a rot set in. This rot was an attitude that became increasingly popular, one that humans were seen as the source of all evil and all problems, as well as thinking that when we try and change things, we make things worse and not better. Now, that oxymoron that's so popular now, sustainable development, is part of the problem in our assessment and evaluation when we discuss these things. Because either we have development, robust, transformative, exciting, dynamic, or we sustain things. You can't have both. Now, our problematic thinking led to issues that was way before the market issues of 1988 and 2008, and Charlie's posed some historical issues, but the financialisation of the casino economy, what people have, like Jasmine, have alluded to, not just zombie banks, zombie companies that were not allowed to fail, and mass quantitative easing all played a big part. But fundamentally, our retreat from large-scale, big plans that could inspire long-term investment projects, not just part of the electoral cycle, research and development, innovation, and allowing poor performance to fail, all of that went away. There has been no real attempt to address this, and until we do, and it's part of the reason that Liz Truss has fallen on a sword, but she didn't win the argument with her colleagues or with the public. But until we do, we're not going to get to grips with mass cheap energy for all, with significant house building and infrastructure, and have a society that's able to make everyone more wealthy, rather than a superficial binary distinction, which I think we see today touted a bit too much, either tax cuts or wage increases or redistribution. So I say, for starters, we make this world. It's up to us. It's not about economists or leaders or anyone else. It's the public who retreated from the stage for 2 or 3 decades, and now we have to come back. Our needs, our dreams, our wants. We should be making our political claims and insisting on them, but understanding the context of the things I've just said. We need to be able to convince one another that we can make things better, not worse. That we need productivity, and that prosperity is not a dirty word, but it's what most ordinary people will say they want for their family and their friends and their children and the next generation. I've never met anyone who's ordinary says, I want my kids to be worse off than I am. Now, just to say, campaigning, many of us have campaigned, and we had some real good successes around challenging the vaccine mandate and the passports. We did that together. We've got campaigns like Axe the Tax and What's the Plan for the NHS, and even right now, reinstate and compensate the care workers. But I think if we don't address this issue of productivity and prosperity and engage the public in that plan, and in fact, us as the public insist on it, and talk to our MPs and our friends and others, but not look to them to solve it, because what we're going to see is much more pain. And we're going to see much more pain either way, but how are we going to attempt to resolve it? So, I'll just, is that yellow card?
Yellow,
oh,
1 minute.
Oh my goodness. So I'll just say there are a couple of very big things that we need to address. Cheap, plentiful energy. Nuclear is a huge component of that. Shell, even under Yorkshire, we have lots of availability of that. America's demonstrated that it's safe. We need to have a house building campaign, 5 million new houses at least. That houses should not be investments, they should be places to live, and we can get involved in the productive transformation of investment in business that can benefit everyone. I think that ultimately, right, just saying that I've got a better plan than you've got or whatever is not going to cut anything with anyone. We need to believe in the ability of the public, the ability of ordinary people, our friends and neighbours, to shape the world, to make history, and we need to forget the old signposts and the old flags. I'm not really interested in Labour, Tory, Lib Dem or any of that. What I'm interested in is, where do you stand on the side of productivity? Where do you stand on the side of freedom? You cannot have freedom unless we have some element of prosperity. History has demonstrated that. We have an opportunity now where we can really make an enormous impact, and I would invite everyone to get involved in that. Join with us if you want to and can. We'd love to have you as a member, but most importantly, remember, history is always made by ordinary people in the modern period. Us, all of us. Let's make it one about prosperity and productivity for all together.
Thank you. Great. Well, those were fantastic starts to our debate. So we now have some roving microphones.
Yeah, my name's Gordon Kerr from Covenant Partners. I'd just like to applaud all the speakers. I'm particularly furious about low traffic neighbourhoods, and I'll look up with you later. I thought Jasmine's one of the best speeches I've ever heard her give on television. Banks at the root of everything. I think the balance of payment, the reason that no one talks about it is because the imbalances are so great it's embarrassing to everybody. In the sense that the Office of Budget Responsibility knows that things are working out okay. I think Richard's policies are great, and I've seen you show on television talking about pubs. But if there's so many ideas, I would encourage everybody to focus on one. It's this point about the banks and removing the top layer of the Bank of England, because it's blindingly obvious to everybody that all of these problems are surely caused by banks. And I just welcome anybody else's views as to who you'd replace the top people at the Bank of England with. Thank you.
Oh, hi there. Yeah, I agree with a lot of what a lot of you said. I partly wonder if the cost of living crisis is partly a hysteria whipped up in order to get rid of climate change targets. There's a lot of talk on the news about heating or eating in the middle of summer. There's a lot of talk about subsidising energy bills for everyone, while they're focusing on the news on the poorest 1 to 5% who we should always look after, and they're saying, oh, because they can't afford their energy bills or their food, we're going to pay for everyone. And then again, the government not focusing on energy efficiency. I see train stations leaving lights on all over the place, supermarkets installing fridges that don't even have doors, all guzzling our collective resource of energy. Nothing said about that. Everyone just saying, well, let's just the next taxpayer in 20 years pay for it with debt. And I wonder what you thought about that. I liked your idea of a vision, you know, how you said people in the past, they aspire to having a swimming pool and a home. And I do see a positive future, hopefully run by renewable and nuclear energy. People are healthy and happy. And well, I hope all of us can help see a vision like that, rather than there's a lot of negativity out there, and it's a very positive thing. So, yeah, thank you.
I thought it was really interesting to hear from Richard and Charlie and Alan about the different groups, and Niall as well. You know, different groups that are kind of representing different people out there at the moment. Very powerful campaign groups. Because it seems to me that pretty much all opinion that could be described as mainstream no longer has a political home, particularly after yesterday's debacle with the Tory party. Now you've got Hunt taken over from Kwasi Kwarteng. It seems the Tories have lost their anchor, and they've pitched themselves pretty much in opposition to the people in the Red Wall that voted them in, you know, in 2019. Charlie, you were talking about the Labour Party, I think, you know, and unionism, really. And I just wonder who is it who's going to represent working class interests politically and economically? Because the Labour Party, to me, doesn't seem to be doing that. They seem to be continually rejecting working class mores, whether that's the white working class or the immigrant working class or the Red Wall or whoever it is. It's been overtaken by a managerial professional class. How are we going to turn that over? Or do we need to turn that over? Is that a waste of time? And I'm really interested to hear from all of you campaign groups about the current state of the parties and how that is impacting on this crisis that we're facing politically and economically. Thanks.
I'd like to thank the panel for all their contributions, and I took something from all of them, like particularly the onward march of the authoritarianism that is liberally being meted out to the population of this country, but not only this country, certainly the Western world, and like increasingly the rest of the world. 100% agree with everything you say about banks, and I would say more. It's not even just getting rid of the like the Bank of England, but it's the concept of the central banks, and it is the Bank of International Settlement, which is delivering an agenda worldwide to the people. Charlie, I very much agree with like essentially your entire like analysis there, and Alan, of course, I agree with your idea that it is the people that will be able to summon up alternatives and solutions to this. But one of my particular concerns is the role of the media. Now, the BBC has fronted this thing called the Trusted News Initiative, which is only a couple of years old. But what it has done is it's made a link between all the state broadcasters across Europe, North Africa, like North America. It's included all the 10 largest tech companies, major newspapers, even the main script writing software is signed up, and the purpose of that was to have a singular narrative, and that narrative certainly has nothing to do with real people standing up and saying enough is enough. So I'd like to hear what the panel think about the media in the current situation we find ourselves in.
I might have to, after listening to Richard Tice, resign my Tory party membership. I've had a bit of a dealing with CCHQ recently, obviously from rural Yorkshire. Quite a lot of the points I've been making to other young Tories is pretty much said, and I've read your help plan in August, and to be fair, I agreed with quite a lot of it. And where I'm from, not a lot of people are politically active at all. Not a lot of them are financially literate. They vote red, they have for 100 years, they probably will for 100 more unless something breaks it. And quite frankly, I joined the Tory party thinking, do you know what, they're in power, I might be able to swing it with the last election. They basically hung me out to dry, and a lot of people where I live don't get represented at all. And I'm a trained engineer at BTEC Level 3, Advanced Manufacturing Engineering. COVID destroyed the manufacturing sector where I live, pretty much smashed it. Everybody's moved down. there's no entrance jobs unless you're willing to do an apprenticeship, which would just mean me doing the exact same thing all over again for another 3 years at my own cost nothing will do. I know a lot of people where I live, out my age, out of about 24, only 3 of them work. I'm sadly not included in that, just because there's no work that's worth doing. To your other panelist point, the industrial heartland, it's pretty much gone. A lot of people like industry back where I live. It's prime for an industrial rail yard, north, south, east, west line, less than half a mile gap. And I was just sort of wondering, if you were to get into power, or if you could tomorrow or whenever get a majority or even a coalition, how would you help places like mine, and how would you improve people where I live's lot in life?
I don't think we should kind of underestimate some of the kind of overwhelming kind of binding powers that affinity to the Labour Party, or affinity to the Labour Party and affinity to the Tory Party that exists, because that kind of binary divide, or main binary divide in politics, has existed for quite some time. I think it's very easy to kind of look back over the last couple of years and think that things have changed very quickly. Actually, it's been a long time kind of coming. So it took the Red Wall a long time to fall, and it did for a particular reason, as people will know in the 2019 election. And it's not as if those organisations, the Labour Party and the Tory Party, are going away. People still kind of do look to them in one way, shape or form. That's not to kind of again underestimate some of the changes that are happening. So I'm quite excited about the Enough is Enough campaign, I have to say. I went to I'm from Newcastle, I'm a trade unionist, went to the demonstration there. There were a lot of people there that I'd seen before, but there were some new people as well. And I think, that you can kind of take a bit of spirit from, in the same way that, protests around the low traffic neighbourhood, Together campaign, those sort of things, have been quite inspiring. They are slow to build, but they can be quite inspiring. But I don't think we should underestimate the kind of binds that people do have to existing political parties and existing political organisations. They're very difficult to kind of to break away from. But there are things which I think are promising, and people will always fight back. I mean, Charlie talked about trade unions and the kind of history of people fighting back. People will always do that in spite of the legislation there to restrict them.
Thank you. So, who wants to respond from the panel?
Very briefly, I wanted to come back and just clarify that I'm not speaking on behalf of the Labour Party today, nor the mayor that I represent. They wouldn't have me doing that, and I'd probably get in lots of trouble for trying to do so. So I am not their chosen representative today. And also, just to add to that, if anybody in this room thinks I hate the Labour Party, believe me, you do not hate the Labour Party more than me. Just for the sake of sort of coming back on some of the panel, because I think there's been a heartening amount of agreement between people, and I think that's really good to hear. I just wanted to come back and maybe quibble with some little things, because I think that there's sometimes a risk of being too dogmatic with, for example, the idea of, the quantitative easing. So I think quantitative easing, as it's been done, I think you're absolutely right, Jasmine, has been a disaster. But I think there's a very different thing between quantitative easing to pay for everyone to have free Nando's and quantitative easing to help fund developing a railway connection in North England. And I think that what the money is spent on is crucially important here, and I think that that's a massive consideration to be made. I'm certainly not here saying that I don't think the state should be putting its hands in its pocket to rebuild this country's infrastructure, to lay the groundwork, the framework for reindustrialising parts of this country, and in fact I think nobody else will if the state does not. So I just wanted to come back and sort of clarify on that one, that I think that there is a role for a central body which is able to accumulate those funds and invest it where it's needed. But what we actually need, in my opinion, is a state which looks strategically at the United Kingdom as a corporate entity and thinks, what do we need? What are we short of? Where are our strategic weak points? The gas lines? Are they the fact that we're reliant on imports for food? Is it the fact that, all of these things were stress tested during COVID, and we revealed quite how vulnerable we are as a nation, quite how dependent we are on the outside world. And a degree of dependency in international trade, absolutely. But to the extent that we're at today, clearly, as soon as the shit hits the fan, pardon my French, things start to go west. And just
briefly.
Oh yeah. On the Enough is Enough campaign as well. I thank you for your support at the back from the man from Newcastle. Once again, yes, absolutely. This is about breaking through a lot of those the traditional party barriers. It's about breaking through the traditional left-right barriers. It's about breaking into new circles of people and bringing together. Like I say, the unifying factor behind that campaign is putting working class people at the heart of politics in this country and putting the interests of those working class people at the heart of everything that's done.
Thank you. Richard.
Thank you. So a couple of people raised the point about the state of the parties and being bound to the two main parties. The biggest single opportunity we have actually for real change and for new ideas from left, right, centre, whoever, is actually proportional representation. And the good news is, amongst all the grief, it's coming, potentially within a much shorter time period. That will make a massive difference because whether it's on the left or the right, new groups, new ideas, competition is good. And the two main parties, frankly, have badly let this country down in so many ways. And so I think that's really important. The other point about, Charlie's quite right, that there are areas where actually the state needs to lead public investment. The thing about QE, and this is why the Bank of England has failed us so much, is that whatever you think about what was done during COVID, I said over a year ago that we had to treat the QE debt like a war bond. 900 billion of debt. If they had turned that into a corona-like war bond for 75 years, which they could have done at a fixed rate of interest, because it sits on the Bank of England computer, stick a rate of interest of 1%, and frankly, forget about it. They've done exactly the opposite. They've terrified the markets by saying, we're now going to drip that QE debt back into the market at 30, 40, 50 billion a year. The market's going to say, well, if you want my money, I want a higher price to have it. Utter madness. Andrew Bailey should be fired, but of course that wasn't possible because his chancellor was about to be fired himself. So it is catastrophic. There are other great people who could have led the Bank of England. He was the wrong appointment at the time, and we're left in a really bad place. The role of the media. Well, I would say this, wouldn't I? I'm a presenter for Talk TV, so I just put that last advert there.
No. Yeah, the problem I consider with QE is that it's like a drug. So you start off with the soft stuff, and then you tell yourself you're going to come off, but then something hits you, and you've just got to go back to it again and a bit harder, and then you've got to have the harder stuff and the harder stuff. This is the problem. Yes, in small amounts, absolutely. You think, I can handle it, and that's basically what the Bank of England did. Yeah, we can handle it, and we'll draw it back. It never stopped. It never stopped, and this is the issue. If we had some sort of mechanism by which QE was only allowed for 6 months or something, and if you didn't, you were imprisoned, something like that, then maybe. But in and of itself, in the way that it has been used, not just in this country, but in spades in America, certainly by the ECB, it's hopeless. And in answer to the first question, who would I have to replace Andrew Bailey, other than Big Bird? I think it would be, and I can never remember her name. But anyway, the woman who's in charge of things in Russia. What's her name? What is her name? Yelena. Nebulina, thank you very much, Nebulina. I would have her. I think she's done a phenomenal job. So she's the one that I would bring in, although there would be some serious changes in our country if she was there, and I think a lot of people wouldn't like them. She's pretty strict. Thank you, Elvira.
Just to come back on the last 2 points about political allegiances kind of leads me into something that I kind of wanted to say, which is I think the $1 million question is how we do shift the balance. I mean, we've agreed that some of the things that need to be done, but how do we begin to do it? And I was thinking about the last council elections in London and the dilemmas and debates that were going on amongst people who've been involved in campaigning and in the community groups, and it was, do we vote Tory? Most of the people I met who were really, really got it in for Hackney and Islington and Tower Hamlets Labour were all traditional Labour voters. And in Tower Hamlets, Labour just got absolutely smashed because people went to Aspire, who sounds like they're going to maybe sell out over low traffic neighbourhoods anyway. But when people were given an alternative, they went for it. As I said, there were traditional Labour voters. It's like, do we go independent? Do we vote for the Tories? There's a lot of that. Shall we split the vote? People were interested, but there's also the element of local politics. It's so ossified, local councils, is it even worth it? So, Labour in London isn't this powerhouse that you think it is. For me, they just get in sort of by default. They know how to do just enough. They've turned most people off, so they just people just don't participate. So there are debates and things that are going on there. So yeah, a bit of proportional representation might help, but it's actually what we've got to offer is most important. Sorry, I'll leave it there.
Thank you. Alan?
I think we need to be careful not to fetishise things too much. Replacing individuals in something without addressing the core issue that we're facing isn't going to solve anything, right? We shouldn't fetishise in and of itself banking and financialisation. It's part of a situation where people have evacuated and abandoned the whole debate and discussion about productivity. Now, obviously what's happened as well at the same time is we've seen Asia transform a whole section of humanity, right, in the last 20 years. So we've seen the potential for those things to happen. The question is, have we got commitment? And commitment only comes from ideas. And I think we talk about economists, we talk about geographers, so we never talk about political economy anymore. I think we have to stop this binary separation, right? I'm all for ordinary people transforming the world. So I think we need to do that. But if we're honest, what we've seen, and this is one of my concerns, I really think what's happened with Enough is fantastic. But historically, we've seen some of the people that have led some of those movements take it down a problematic path. I really want to hope, and we've reached out to work with lots of different people, I hope that we are not going to be governed by that very idea that you have to go back into the Labour Party or you have to support the Tory Party. As it happens, I think enough people know that is not a solution now. They've lost lots of membership, and people can see what's happening. However, the point about having a plan, this is not just a strapline. The Manhattan Project, right, which brought together some of the best minds in the world and transformed things, was something that the state did, right? The state and the public and the private sector needs to be able to all take this approach. When I talk about a plan and engaging the public and making them part of it, it's about how we use our agency, how we use our judgment and our rational minds to work these things out, to support some things in the entrepreneurial sector and to get out of the way in others. Big infrastructure projects are really important. 70% of land's not used in Britain. We have the west coast of Britain where we could become energy independent in 5 years if we use tidal wave in a certain way. We have many of these opportunities, but the will and the commitment has to come part of not just ideas, but a plan. And a plan is a practical thing that we engage with and we help transform and we put forward to everyone, and don't go down the old cul-de-sacs again.
Thank you. Right, more contributions from the floor.
So I just want to say that I completely agree with the idea of these ideas coming from normal people, from workers in this country, and it's not going to come from anywhere else because there has never been a cavalry to come over the hill, and it's not going to come now. I'm also going to say that I don't think the situation that we're in is just about protesting. It is actually about having a programme that takes us forward, and that I am very heartened this morning, not only in this session but in the previous one, to hear that people are very much coalescing around the idea of rebuilding our manufacturing industry, of raising productivity, and of using public finance to do that. One thing that hasn't been mentioned today is actually the part of the plan of doing that being a little bit more about decentralising, because that's how you involve people in a local level. And I'd like to bring up two other issues which I think are really important and related to the balance of payment. Nobody's really talked about food security, which is incredibly important in this country. We import 50% of our food stuff, of what we eat. We have massive food insecurity, and we are completely at the whim of things like the increase in the cost of wheat because of the war in Ukraine. And the other thing I'd like to bring up, which is very specific, is about the steel industry, which is absolutely going to the dogs, is very under threat, but you cannot rebuild in any kind of manufacturing industry. You can't rebuild anything unless you have some steel, and we cannot afford to be dependent on other countries for it.
Great, thank you.
I noticed there was a great deal of consensus on the platform, which was great, about things are possible to be different. You know, a can-do attitude seemed to unite all of you, which then poses the question as to, if we as individuals can say something is possible, what is it that's holding us collectively back? And I think we therefore need to think a bit more about what the sort of cultural or intellectual barriers are that is getting in the way of turning that positivity into something which actually makes real change. Now, there's a point you made, Jasmine, and maybe I've misheard you, but you talked about the financial literacy of the electorate. And if I heard you right, I mean, I think that's not the problem. I think people are actually financially very literate, and I think people do know how to juggle their budgets. I think people know when they haven't got any income coming in, and the electricity bill is coming, and the food bill is going up. I think people are extremely capable of dealing with that. But if you're referring to a sort of an economic sense of despair, or a sense of despair about the ability to do anything about the economy, I think that is right. And I think that's a sort of fatalism which is spread in the culture today, which I think we have to engage with. The sense that the economy is something out there, it's external, it's unpredictable, it's dangerous, and there's very little we can do about it. And I think that's a symptom of this, you know, what we've seen expressed in the populist rise, you know, the sense of the detachment between those people up there and ourselves, the rest of society. And in that, I'd say I would very wary and be very critical of one aspect of fatalism, the idea that it's all being controlled by somebody, the conspiratorial style of economy. And I think that's extremely dangerous, because the idea that somebody is controlled, whether it's Klaus Schwab at the World Economic Forum or so-and-so at the International Monetary Fund, that sort of sense of saying there is somebody in control and is doing us down is actually the negation of taking control ourselves. It's actually saying there's a conspiracy up there of all these rich people, and of course there are rich people around, we can see them all the time, but the idea that they're controlled, they're not in control, they're no more in control than we are in this room. So the important point, I think, is not to finger point, there's too much of that going on, blame shifting. I mean, you had that, even very recently we saw with people blaming, oh, it's the Treasury, it's the Bank of England, it's the politicians and so on. We've got to see that it's not being controlled by anybody out there, but it can be controlled by us. So we've got to challenge that fatalism, I think, is an important intellectual step for us to take.
I think there's a central concept which has two subsets which the average person in the street doesn't understand, and that central concept is capitalism. I believe there are two fundamental forms of capitalism. One is good and one is bad, and they shouldn't be confused. The good form of capitalism I call community capitalism. It's the rags to riches capitalism based upon Alan's idea of production and trade. It's the way my father brought me up. He started a small one-man business. He grew it to be a 10-man business. He was a coal man in the winter. He was a turf man in the summer. And that took us literally from rags to riches. That's what I believe to be good capitalism. And it's a great thing. It's lifted poverty off the shoulders of many people over centuries. But there is a bad form of capitalism, which I call crony capitalism, and it's the capitalism that you've been alluding to, where we get two entities, politicians and big business, get together in bed. The politicians give contracts paid for by the taxpayer to their friends in business, and the business pay them back literally by funding the political parties. This is a corrupt form of capitalism, which I call crony capitalism. The problem is that in the public mind, if you say I'm a capitalist, they take you to be a crony capitalist. And capitalism has a bad name in most people's mind. Unfortunately, it is the way that poor people have the opportunity to get out of rags and into riches through the starting of small businesses which provide products and services which are required by their local community, and we should be supporting what I call community capitalism and bringing the word capitalism back into the main front as a good force for poor people, as opposed as an oppressive force for good people. So that's what I would like to say.
Back to the gentleman there in the blue shirt.
I do think that, we've got the most frustrating thing, so agreeing with Jasmine, that I remember in the whole lockdown thing was the kind of magical thinking. And that you would say to people over and over again, but if we all stay indoors, nothing's going to get made. I mean, literally nothing's going to get made. So all those checks that come through, which I'm very grateful for, obviously, when they turn up, aren't going to represent anything. They're just like claims on nothing. And that's how it turned out. And I find the energy discussion is a bit the same. So the really interesting Labour Party conference on industrial and energy policy, but at the heart of it was this insane piece of magical thinking. You cannot seriously talk about shifting towards renewables before you've got it. You know, nobody should be saying to me, let's have renewables, let's close down this gas plant, let's close down this energy generation before the renewables are in place. You know, at the moment they're making a tiny percentage of our energy. So it was crazy of Ed Miliband all through the noughties and to be shutting down the power stations, and now suddenly we find we've got no power, and you're thinking, well, why did you not listen when I was trying to tell you that? And anyway, sorry.
Okay.
Hi there, thanks very much for your contributions, and it's really quite, as a 27-year-old boomerang kid living at home, who probably is going to still keep living at home for as long as we've got this housing crisis. Maslow's hierarchy of needs, one of the key things is a safe, secure, affordable, also well-built property to live in, and then there's that social mobility. We're talking about prosperity and productivity. You cannot have either of those things without dealing with this housing crisis. We're talking about inflation and inflation spirals. What about the rent spirals? What about the service charge spirals that leaseholders like my mum are facing? And one last thing, what's really encouraging from just like a young person's perspective is that we're talking about policies, we're not talking about parties anymore, and actually on the energy debate, for example, you're talking about, well, why don't we have our own homegrown energy supply? Well, why can't we do that with housing? Why can't we talk about taxing overseas buyers, 30%, Singapore, everyone's talking about Singapore today. Why don't we do what they do? Or New Zealand, if you want to go for a left-wing government, they've banned foreign or overseas ownership of property, stop the speculation in the market, let people like me and my friends get a home of our own.
Yeah, I was wondering, somehow it resonated with me what you all said, and I was wondering if it seems to me that the state is overregulating really stupid stuff like, how you have to go onto an escalator, and then no vision whatsoever for where do we want to go as a country, and it's exactly that, because I want to have actually a framework where I can play, and different people have different ideas how we get to a better country, and I think everybody should try that out. But it seems we prescribe those solutions and not giving a framework, and I don't know why we do that.
Great, thank you very much.
Hi, and great festival, thanks for putting it on. I was very interested in what the chap down here said about the housing ladder. I've got a 26-year-old son feeling very old, and his biggest issue is trying to get on the housing ladder. We've had 12, 14 years of freakishly low interest rates. That's been great if you've been on the housing ladder. Many of us have done very well, but it's frozen out our kids and grandkids. We need to build more homes. We've got a council by-election where I live in Buckinghamshire, and the Lib Dems are quite shamelessly appealing to the NIMBY vote, as they did in nearby Chesham and Amersham, but there was HS2 there as well. We've got to build more homes. Okay, thank you. And secondly, energy policy. It's been a disaster for decades. We didn't build a new nuclear power station for 30 years, from 1988 to 2018. And now we're wondering, why might the lights go out?
Right, thank you.
Yeah, really exciting, this idea. But going back to fatalism and going back to capitalism, there is a big elephant in the room, yes. To what extent states are really the agency able to modify a development of an economy that is going to worst in terms of individuals. So we have to look also at some structural and systemic condition that we have produced. Because what I see so far is actually actions that have been taken in the last 20 years that demonstrate the states are becoming weaker and weaker. And the latest result in our government demonstrate even more how UK is becoming unable to control international trends and conditions. So great, go back to the people, but what does actually means? And do we have a proper plan?
Thank you.
We've talked a lot about manufacturing today, building houses and energy. Just as a summary, infrastructure doesn't really get talked about that much. And in order to get all of those things, I think it would be worth considering from an infrastructure perspective, especially in some areas of the country up north. Thank you very much.
Unapologetically, I'm a pragmatist, okay? Talking to the lady there about food security, we waste literally millions of tonnes of food upstream. Not the stuff you get in your shops, but stuff that goes into food depots and back out. It gets date life rejected, and it is a scandal. And I was in that industry for 10 years. That needs to be addressed. We are very short term in this country. We want to invest something and then we want to return back on it in a couple of years. If you want to build a railway, for example, a la the French, I mean, my bête noire is the Spanish and the Italians, for crying out loud, both of whom I worked with for 20 years, have both managed to build high-speed rail systems. Where the heck are we? I don't get it. And then we come back to education, mediocrity. We educate mediocrity, in my view, right from the time a child walked in the door. I'll give you one quick example and I'll stop. I have other stuff to say. I was a school governor in the Socialist Republic on the South Coast. No prize for guessing. They had a sports day, and I kid you not, they put a rope on the floor so that nobody could be excluded. Seriously, it happened. And I said, do you really think these kids, when they go out, are going to get that kind of break? Forget it. The world's going to eat them. I was called terrible. I was actually called a fascist at one point. Seriously. We could get those kind of things right. We might move on a bit, rather than sitting talking about it all day, every day.
Right, okay, final points from our speakers. So 1 minute, reverse order, Alan first.
Okay.
Sorry to everybody who didn't get in.
A few things. I think we have to. So, if you look at the investment in R&D from 1991 to 2002, the expenditure as a fraction of energy sector's total turnover dropped by more than half to around 0.33%. We cannot do things seriously if we do not have the commitment to investment. I think at the same time, and that goes for house building, that goes for transforming green areas as well as brownfield sites, building on the green belt. It means you have to have difficult arguments with people. You have to have arguments with people that you want to be allies with. I want to know why, when there was a mandate, unions didn't come out and represent their members, right, who are going to be there. But I think that some of them forced a lockdown when they wanted schools to be shut down, right? And I think in the public sector there's been a lot of problems in ideas, but we need to manage and discuss these ideas and come up with solutions around how we can do it. I think we're completely capable of doing it, but we need to have a sense of us and our agency. That means in this room, we all should go out and try and convince our colleagues and our neighbours, get involved as much as possible, get involved in campaigns. When we stopped the mandate in the UK, right, which with a number of other people, it had enormous ramifications. People got a sense of themselves. I think that's true also with other campaigns. I just think the final point I want to make, and it's sort of linked to the whole thing, if you, in the end, we have to tackle a question, which is that do people think that they can change things themselves? Can we make it better? Have we got the capability to do it? Or is there something wrong with us ourselves, right? When you do things on a big scale, is it always going to end up better, worse, not better? Look at France with having 60% of its energy with nuclear, right? 60%. But they haven't, right, had the commitment to invest in upgrades and all of that. And what's happened is now, at the worst possible time, they've got a lack of energy. We've seen the same thing with steel plants being shut down, Ofgem, 25 companies, energy companies going down. We need to be able to tackle these questions. We need to be able to do it together. And I'd encourage all of you to get involved in that with us and everyone else. Thank you.
Thanks, Alan. Let's clap at the end, or else we're going to overrun.
Thank you. Yeah, I'll try and whiz through a few things. Just quickly, housing crisis, completely and utterly agree. I just want to point out there's only been one period of history where we've come anywhere near close to solving housing crisis. That was that post-war period we talked about before. What we were doing then, we built 50% of the houses in this country were council houses being built by councils. You introduce right to buy, you remove the economic ability of councils to build those houses. The building drops off a cliff. It wasn't replaced by the private sector. That affordable housing stock has never been rejuvenated, and now, 40 years on, this is the mess we're in. I wanted to come back because I think there's a few points where people are talking about, where is this agency? Like, why are we feeling so powerless in terms of a public conversation and discourse in terms of how we deal with the economy? And I just wanted to come back to something I didn't have time to say in my original speech, which is we often talk about the economy as though it's an animal or a force of nature, when it's neither. It's simply the way that we choose to produce and distribute resources in our society. That is it. And the sky is the limit. You know, do we choose to have a society where we're paying bankers 1,000 times more than nurses for pushing digital numbers around on a keyboard? You know, is that the choice that we've made? You know, we can have things differently. We can decide what our priorities are. We can decide how we want things to be in a different situation, and we can make it happen. And what I think this comes back to, again, is a neoliberal dogma, which I think has strangled this country's politics and political economy for far too long, which has said that it's purely the state's role is to stand back, and if it does anything, it's just to funnel money into private hands. It's absolute nonsense.
Thank you, Charlie. Richard.
Thank you. The overriding theme here is we need longer term thinking, we need more infrastructure, and in my view, the way to do that is a blend of the win-win. The state needs to play a massive role in owning a percentage of critical national infrastructure. Okay, whether it's our gas network, whether it's some of our utilities, whether it's part of our rail industry, but the state's very bad at actually managing things. If you have the other half being owned by long-term British pension funds on behalf of British pensioners, that's how you get sensible, strategic returns, good management with long-term investment. In so many areas, that is the right model. We haven't got it, we need it.
Thank you. Jasmine.
Yes, just answering for a start on the situation of a lack of financial knowledge in this country. You should come and see things as I have to deal with them on a daily basis. If you speak to any of the debt agencies, they will tell you there is a massive lack of knowledge of financial issues. I agree that the economy is not a separate thing. It is how we individually act, and we need to take that power back in some way. And I think having financial knowledge and just an understanding of how the economy does work will enable us to do that. I do absolutely think that we need far more social housing. We also need to stop the globalisation, the just raiding of our assets in this country. We need to bring back ourselves to the land, as you say, to bring back more food security. It's essential, food and energy security. Globalisation has really harmed a lot of these aspects of our lives.
Great, thank you. Now, very briefly, if you want to
Okay, just to echo a woman in front earlier who said there's nobody coming over the cavalry aren't coming over the hill to rescue us. That's one thing that an argument that went on quite a lot in the groups that I was involved in, and you know, we have to learn to trust ourselves a little bit more. For me, it is about shifting the debate so we're no longer observers and we actually have a say in the way things are, to bring a bit more balance back to the discussion and come up with some genuinely ideas that actually work for all of us, not just a few. So I think it's going to take work. Right?
Thank you. Thanks. Let's thank all those speakers, if we could. Thank you.